You find yourself in the dimly lit corridors of a grand medieval cathedral, the air thick with incense and the solemnity of whispered prayers. It is the year 1250 AD, and as the flickering candlelight dances across the cold stone walls, a young boy, no older than 10, scrubs the floor with weary hands, his small frame dwarfed by the towering arches above. His name lost to history, he toils in the shadow of holy relics and imposing clergy, bound by the chains of servitude and the weight of unfulfilled dreams. In this moment, the boy is not just a servant, but a silent witness to the stark contrasts of faith and power, a life marked by suffering beneath the sacred veneer of the church. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please, comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. In the year 1250 AD, beneath the soaring arches and stained glass windows of a vast medieval cathedral, the chill of dawn settles like a silent shroud. Amid the echoing chants and flickering candlelight, a young boy moves quietly through the shadowed aisles, his small hands clutching a worn cloth as he wipes the cold stone floors. His name is lost to the ages, one among many, but in this moment, he is a servant bound by duty and circumstance, his life unfolding in the suffocating embrace of the church's towering influence. The cathedral, a monument to divine grandeur, rises like a mountain of faith and power at the heart of the bustling town. Its towering spires pierce the grey sky, casting long shadows over narrow streets crowded with merchants, beggars, and townsfolk. Inside, the air is heavy with incense and the murmurs of prayer, a sanctuary not only of worship, but of strict order and unyielding authority. This is a world where the sacred and the secular entwine, yet the boy knows only the harshness that lurks beneath the holy veneer. His days begin before the first light brushes the horizon, long before the choir's voices swell in celestial harmony. He is among the many boys consigned to serve within these walls, children taken from poor families with promises of education and salvation, yet delivered into lives of servitude and silence. The boy's parents, driven by desperation and the weight of poverty, parted with him as one parts with a mere possession, unaware or unwilling to see the toll that such sacrifice exacts. Here in the shadow of the altar, his childhood slips away like grains of sand through trembling fingers. The boy's footsteps are soft but relentless as he navigates the labyrinth of pillars and pews. His tasks are endless and menial, sweeping floors slick with candle wax, carrying heavy vessels of water, lighting and extinguishing the countless candles that flicker like captive stars. Each gesture is performed under the watchful eyes of the clergy, whose stern faces rarely soften, their voices clipped commands cutting through the silence like sharpened blades. In this cathedral, mercy is reserved for prayers, not for those who serve in the shadows. The vastness of the cathedral offers no refuge. Its cavernous nave swallows the boy's small frame, making him feel insignificant beneath the grandeur designed to glorify God. The painted frescoes and intricate carvings that adorn the walls, intended to inspire devotion, instead magnify his isolation. He is a ghost among saints and angels, invisible to the congregation, but indispensable to the machinery of worship. The boy's world is defined by rigid discipline. Hesitation or error brings swift rebuke, and the threat of punishment is ever present. There is no space here for childhood's gentle grace or the laughter of youth. As he moves through his daily routine, the boy's thoughts drift briefly beyond the cold stone and flickering flames. He wonders about the life he left behind, the worn wooden door of his family's humble cottage, the distant fields he once roamed, the warmth of a mother's embrace. But such memories are fragile as the thin candlelight that barely holds back the darkness. Within the cathedral's walls, hope is a whispered secret, and freedom a distant dream. The church's authority is absolute. Its power extends beyond these hallowed halls to touch every corner of the town and every aspect of life. The clergy wield not only spiritual influence, but also control over land, wealth, and justice. In this rigid hierarchy, The boy is at its lowest rung, a mere instrument of service, whose value is measured by obedience. The cathedral's magnificence is built upon the labor and sacrifice of countless such children, their names and stories buried beneath layers of dust and forgotten prayers. The boy's presence is a silent testament to the church's complex relationship with society, a beacon of faith for many, yet a fortress of control for those who serve its purposes. His youth is a fragile thread woven into the vast tapestry of medieval life, where poverty and piety intertwine inextricably. For all the cathedral's splendor, it is also a place where innocence is traded for survival, where the promise of salvation often masks a harsher reality. As the sun rises higher, filtering through the stained glass in kaleidoscopes of color, the boy continues his work, his small hands steady despite the weight of exhaustion that tugs at his limbs. Each day blurs into the next, a relentless cycle of chores and silence, punctuated only by the distant echoes of hymns and the solemn tolling of bells. The cathedral's walls hold his secret sorrows, silent witnesses to a childhood surrendered to the demands of an institution that values duty above all else. In these early hours, before the congregation fills the nave and the clergy take their places to lead the faithful, the boy's solitary figure moves with quiet determination. He is unseen by those who come seeking spiritual guidance, yet his labor is the unseen foundation upon which their worship rests. The grandeur of the church depends on the tireless efforts of those like him, invisible, voiceless, and bound by a strict social order that offers little hope of escape. This cathedral, a beacon of divine light to the world outside, is also a prison for the boy, whose life unfolds in the shadow of greatness. The cold stones beneath his feet are both his path and his chains, guiding him deeper into a world where childhood is a luxury few can afford. Here, amid the soaring ceilings and sacred relics, the boy's story begins, a quiet, somber tale of servitude and survival beneath the unyielding gaze of the medieval church. The cathedral's towering spires were not merely symbols of divine aspiration, they were monuments to earthly power, their shadows stretching far beyond the stones and stained glass, enveloping the town in the church's unyielding grasp. In the year 1250 AD, the medieval church stood as the most formidable institution in Europe, its influence permeating every facet of life. Wealth amassed through tithes, land ownership, and donations made the church an unrivaled landholder, rivaling even kings in political and economic might. It was within this vast network of influence and control that the boy's fragile existence was entwined. For families crushed beneath the weight of poverty, the church's promise of salvation and education was a beacon, a hope that their children might escape a life of destitution. Yet this hope was often a double-edged sword. Many children, like the boy who swept the cathedral's cold floors, were relinquished, sold, or given away by desperate parents who saw no other path. The church, with its insatiable need for servants, choir boys, and attendants, became a repository for these children, their lives exchanged in a transaction cloaked in piety but shadowed by exploitation. The boy's journey to the cathedral had not been one of choice but of necessity. His parents, burdened by hunger and hardship, had handed him over with trembling hands and heavy hearts, trusting that the church's sanctity would shield him from the cruel realities of the outside world. Yet, within the echoing walls of the cathedral, that trust was fragile. The boy was one among many, a nameless figure in a vast institution where obedience was prized above all else and individuality was sacrificed on the altar of discipline. Within the church, the boy's role was defined by the rigid hierarchy that governed every interaction. Clergy members, from humble priests to lofty bishops, exercised strict control over their charges. The boy's days were regimented, his every action monitored and corrected. The church's discipline was harsh and unyielding. Mistakes were met with swift rebuke, and mercy was often elusive. The boy learned quickly that survival depended not on questioning but on submission, a lesson etched into his spirit with every stern glance and sharp word. The cathedral itself was a microcosm of medieval society, its grandeur a mask for the harsh realities endured by those who served within its walls. The boy observed the stark contrast between the clergy's opulence and his own meagre existence. The richly embroidered vestments, the golden chalices, and the elaborate rituals stood in sharp relief against the boy's threadbare garments and ceaseless labor. The church's wealth was built not only on the devotion of the faithful, but also on the unpaid toil of children like him, whose lives were consumed in service to an institution that valued power and order above compassion. Education, often touted as a blessing for these children, was a privilege meted out sparingly and selectively. While some choir boys received instruction in Latin and music, many others remained illiterate, their days consumed by manual labor. The boy's own education was limited to rote prayers and menial tasks, his potential stifled by the strictures of his station. The promise of spiritual enlightenment was overshadowed by the demands of servitude, and the boy's mind, young and eager, found little nourishment within the cold stone walls. The church's influence extended beyond the cathedral's doors, shaping the very fabric of medieval society. It dictated moral codes, administered justice, and controlled vast tracts of land worked by peasants who owed allegiance to ecclesiastical lords. In this world, the boy's life was predetermined by birth and circumstance, his fate intertwined with the church's unassailable authority. The institution's reach was such that even kings deferred to its judgment, and its decrees shaped the lives of all who dwelled beneath its shadow. Within this context, the boy's servitude was both a product and a symbol of the church's power. His existence was a quiet testament to the thousands of children consigned to similar fates, their identities erased in the pursuit of order and obedience. The cathedral's magnificence, its soaring arches and sacred relics, was sustained by the labor and sacrifice of those invisible to the faithful masses who gathered beneath its roof. The boy's story was but one thread woven into the vast tapestry of medieval servitude and spiritual authority. The church's control over these children was multifaceted, encompassing physical, spiritual, and emotional domination. The boy was taught to view his position as a divine calling, a service to God that transcended personal hardship. Yet beneath this veneer of sanctity lay a system that commodified youth, using children as tools to bolster the institution's grandeur and reinforce its social hierarchy. The boy's sense of self was slowly eroded by relentless demands and the ever-present reminder of his lowly status. Despite the church's claims of benevolence, the boy's daily life revealed a harsher reality. The promise of salvation was tempered by the cold discipline and isolation that marked his existence. The clergy's authority was absolute, and their treatment of servants often reflected the broader societal indifference to the suffering of the poor and powerless. The boy learned to conceal his fears and endure his burdens in silence, his spirit tempered but not yet broken. The boy's place within the church's vast machinery was precarious and anonymous. He was one of many whose lives were shaped by forces beyond their control, caught in the tension between spiritual aspiration and earthly subjugation. The cathedral's splendor, resplendent with sacred art and resonant with hymns, stood in stark contrast to the boy's unspoken sorrows and unmet needs. It was a world where faith and power converged, yet the cost of that convergence was paid in the quiet suffering of the vulnerable. As the boy continued his duties, the weight of the church's authority pressed upon him, a constant reminder of his position in the social order. His days were marked by repetition and rigor, his identity reduced to that of a servant within an institution that prized order above all else. The boy's life, shaped by the church's vast network of power and control, was a reflection of the medieval world itself, a world where hope was scarce and survival demanded endurance. In this environment, the boy's vulnerability was both a product and a prisoner of the times. The church, for all its spiritual grandeur, was an institution deeply enmeshed in the politics and economics of medieval society. Its promise of salvation came with a heavy price for those who served in its shadow. The boy's story, unfolding within these walls, was emblematic of countless others, children whose lives were shaped by the intersection of faith, power, and poverty in a world that offered little mercy to the weakest among them. As the boy's days unfolded within the cathedral's towering walls, the rhythm of his life became a relentless cycle of servitude and surveillance. Each morning, before the first light filtered through the stained glass, he awoke to the cold stone floor of the servants' quarters, a cramped and shadowed space shared with others like him, children bound by circumstance and duty. There was little comfort in these sparse accommodations, rough straw pallets, scant warmth, and the ever-present chill that seeped through cracks in the ancient masonry. Yet, despite the harshness, the boy rose with quiet resolve, knowing that his survival depended on obedience and endurance. His daily routine was a litany of menial tasks, each performed under the unblinking gaze of clergy and overseers who measured worth by efficiency and silence. The boy swept the vast nave, his broom strokes echoing against the stone like a mournful chant. He carried heavy pitchers of water to wash the altar, polished brass candlesticks until they gleamed, and arranged the pews with meticulous care. No corner of the cathedral was beyond his reach, and no task too small to escape scrutiny. Failure was met not just with reprimand but with punishment, a harsh reminder that in this sacred place, discipline was paramount. The cathedral itself was a world of contrasts. Its grandeur and solemn beauty stood in stark opposition to the boy's bleak existence. The lofty ceilings, painted with scenes of heaven and scripture, seemed to mock the boy's smallness and vulnerability. Choirs of boys trained in sacred song filled the air with ethereal melodies, their voices rising in praise and devotion, yet the boy was not among them. His place was not among the singers or the learned, but in the shadows, performing the invisible labor that made worship possible. The gulf between the boy's reality and the cathedral's sanctity was a chasm that widened with every passing day. Surveillance was constant and unyielding. The clergy maintained strict order, their eyes sharp for any sign of disobedience or weakness. The boy moved cautiously, aware that a misstep could invite censure or worse. His interactions with others were limited, marked by a wary silence that underscored his isolation. Friendships were fleeting and fragile, for trust was a scarce commodity in a world where vulnerability could be exploited. The boy learned to mask his fears and desires beneath a veneer of dutiful compliance, his true self hidden behind a mask of quiet endurance. The pressure to conform was relentless. The church demanded not only physical labor but spiritual submission. The boy was instructed in prayers and rituals, taught to recite sacred texts with precision, and reminded constantly of his place in the divine order. Yet, these lessons often felt hollow against the backdrop of his daily hardships. The promise of salvation was distant and abstract, a reward for obedience that seemed forever beyond reach. Instead, the boy grappled with a growing sense of invisibility, his identity reduced to a function within the church's vast machinery. Isolation weighed heavily upon him. Though surrounded by the throng of clergy, choir boys, and worshippers, the boy was profoundly alone. His world was limited to the cold corridors and shadowed chapels of the cathedral, where the only warmth came from flickering candles and the faint glow of stained glass. Moments of kindness were rare and treasured. A gentle word from a sympathetic priest, a shared glance with another servant boy, but these were exceptions in a world defined by hierarchy and control. The boy's limited freedom was further curtailed by the church's strict rules. Movement was restricted. He was expected to remain within designated areas, his presence tolerated only where deemed necessary. The cathedral's sprawling grounds offered no refuge, only the constant reminder of his servitude. Even the sacred spaces meant for contemplation and peace were arenas of discipline and expectation. The boy learned early that his desires and needs were secondary to the church's demands, that his life was not his own but a thread woven into a grand design beyond his understanding. Yet within this harsh existence, the boy's spirit was not entirely extinguished. He found fragile moments of solace in the cathedral's art and music, the intricate carvings of saints and angels, the soft murmur of chants drifting through the air. These glimpses of beauty offered brief respite from toil and fear, small islands of grace in a sea of hardship. The boy treasured these moments, clutching them close as silent acts of resistance against the bleakness that threatened to consume him. Despite the weight of his circumstances, the boy's curiosity and yearning persisted. He observed the rituals with a quiet attentiveness, wondering about the mysteries they sought to unravel. His mind, though burdened by labor, retained a flicker of wonder and hope. The cathedral, for all its demands, was also a place of stories and symbols, and the boy found himself drawn to these glimpses of a world beyond his immediate suffering. In these quiet reflections, he nurtured a fragile dream of a life not defined solely by servitude. Yet the boy's reality was unyielding. Each day he was reminded of the gulf between his dreams and his existence. The church's grandeur was sustained by countless children like him, whose names were forgotten and whose stories remained untold. The boy's struggle was emblematic of a system that prized order and obedience above compassion, where innocence was sacrificed on the altar of discipline. His life was a testament to the harshness of a world ruled by rigid hierarchy and unrelenting authority. Within the cathedral's vast and shadowed halls, the boy continued his unseen labor, his small figure moving steadily through the cycles of duty and discipline. His spirit, though battered, held fast to the faintest glimmers of hope and resilience. In the silence between the chants and beneath the weight of stone and scripture, the boy's story unfolded, a quiet testament to endurance in a world that demanded conformity and sacrifice. Within the cathedral's towering walls, beneath layers of incense and hymn, the boy's fragile existence darkened as shadows of abuse crept into his daily life. The church, a sanctuary for the faithful, harbored a harsher reality for those like him, children bound not only by servitude, but by suffering. What began as silent endurance soon became a battle against the cruel hands and harsh words of those sworn to guide souls yet blind to the innocence they crushed. The boy had learned early that the church's discipline was unforgiving, but the line between correction and cruelty blurred with alarming ease. Clergy members, entrusted with spiritual care, sometimes wielded their authority as a weapon. Physical punishment was meted out, not merely for disobedience, but often arbitrarily, a reminder of the boy's place in the strict hierarchy. Striking hands, harsh lashes from rods, and cold, accusing gazes became part of his daily reality. Each inflicted pain was a wound not only on flesh but on spirit, chipping away at the boy's sense of safety and self. The boy's suffering was rarely witnessed by others. The cathedral's vastness provided cover for secrets, and fear silenced many who might have offered solace. Punishments were administered in secluded chambers or shadowed corners, where the boy's cries were muffled by stone and secrecy. The clergy, revered by the town and feared by those beneath them, maintained a facade of holiness that masked the abuses hidden within. To speak out was unthinkable. The boy knew that resistance could invite harsher torments or banishment from a world that was already narrow and unforgiving. Emotional abuse accompanied the physical. The boy was often the target of cruel words and derision, his failures magnified, his worth questioned. Clergy members, their tempers sharpened by authority and disdain, mocked his youth and poverty, reminding him that he was a servant, nothing more. The boy internalized these messages, the harsh judgments weighing heavily on his fragile self-esteem. The cathedral's grandeur seemed to mock his suffering, its sacred beauty indifferent to the pain endured by those who labored unseen. Isolation deepened as the boy withdrew into himself, seeking refuge from the relentless pressures and abuses. He learned to hide bruises beneath coarse clothing, to mask tears behind a stoic expression. The cathedral's vastness became a prison, its silence a shroud that enveloped his secret sorrows. Friendship was scarce. Mistrust ran deep among the servants, each wary of the dangers that lurked behind closed doors and watchful eyes. The boy's loneliness was profound, a solitude that gnawed at his spirit even as he fulfilled his duties. Despite the fear and pain, the boy clung to a fragile thread of endurance. His mind retreated to memories of gentler times, the distant warmth of a mother's embrace, the fleeting laughter of childhood now lost. These recollections, though faint, were lifelines amid the darkness, small sparks of light in a world otherwise dominated by suffering. In whispered prayers and secret moments, the boy sought solace in faith, hoping for mercy not granted by men but promised by God. The boy's plight was a reflection of a wider tragedy within the church's walls. Many children like him bore similar scars, their suffering a hidden cost of the institution's power. The church's vastness and authority created a system where abuses could flourish unnoticed, protected by tradition and fear. The boy's story was one among countless untold narratives, silent cries swallowed by the cathedral's stone and sacred rituals. The weight of abuse pressed not only on the boy's body, but on his emerging identity. The innocence of youth was eroded, replaced by a wary vigilance born of necessity. Trust became a dangerous luxury, and hope a fragile, elusive dream. The boy's spirit, though battered, resisted complete surrender, holding on to the faintest glimmers of resilience amid the storm of torment. In moments of quiet solitude, the boy sought refuge in the cathedral's hidden corners, the cool shadow beneath a carved arch, the quiet stillness of a forgotten chapel. Here, away from watchful eyes, he allowed himself brief respite, a momentary escape from the harshness of his existence. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on ancient stone, and for a fleeting time, the boy imagined a life beyond pain and servitude. Yet the cathedral's walls were unyielding, and the boy's torment continued. The clergy's authority was absolute, their judgment swift and often merciless. The boy navigated this treacherous landscape with cautious steps, each day a test of endurance and survival. His resilience was both a shield and a burden, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure even the gravest of trials. The abuses inflicted upon the boy were not merely personal tragedies, but symptoms of a system that prioritized control over compassion. The Church's immense power allowed cruelty to fester behind sanctified doors, where the vulnerable were silenced and discarded. The boy's suffering was a stark reminder that beneath the grandeur of faith lay a world fraught with pain and injustice, where innocence was sacrificed in the name of order. As the boy endured these trials, his story remained hidden from the eyes of the faithful, who gathered beneath the cathedral's soaring arches. To them, the Church was a beacon of hope and salvation. To the boy, it was a fortress of suffering and silence. His pain was invisible, his voice unheard, yet within the depths of his being, a quiet defiance took root, a yearning for dignity, for kindness, for a life beyond the shadows of abuse. The boy's journey through this darkness was a harrowing passage, marked by moments of despair and the faintest sparks of courage. Each day tested the limits of his endurance, yet he persisted, a silent witness to the harsh realities concealed within the Church's walls. His story, though shrouded in silence, spoke volumes about the cost of power wielded without mercy, and the resilience of a spirit battered but unbroken. The boy's childhood, once a fragile bloom of innocence and wonder, had withered beneath the cathedral's cold stone and the Church's relentless demands. As days bled into months, the weight of servitude and suffering forced upon him a premature maturity that was as brutal as it was unforgiving. The carefree laughter of youth was silenced, replaced by the harsh reality of endless toil and unyielding discipline. In this sacred but merciless place, the boy was compelled to abandon the tender remnants of childhood and adopt a hardened resolve to survive. The tasks that once might have seemed simple became heavy burdens, not merely in labor, but in the toll they exacted on his spirit. Each chore, from scrubbing floors to tending flickering candles, was a reminder that his worth was measured only by service and obedience. The Church's towering hierarchy brooked no weakness. The boy was expected to perform, to endure, and to remain invisible beneath the grandeur of worship. The boundaries between child and servant blurred until they vanished entirely, replaced by a role that demanded submission and silence. His body, though still small, bore the marks of this forced maturity. The boy moved with a cautious steadiness, betraying a weariness far beyond his years. The bruises and scars, visible and hidden, spoke of punishments endured and dangers faced. Yet it was the invisible wounds, the erosion of hope and identity, that weighed heaviest. The boy's gaze, once bright with curiosity, now held a guarded emptiness, a reflection of the heavy price exacted by the Church's unyielding expectations. The psychological toll was profound. The boy wrestled with a growing sense of loss, not only of childhood but of self. The relentless demands of servitude stripped away the freedom to dream, to question, to simply be. The Church's doctrine of obedience was a cage as confining as the stone walls that surrounded him, shaping his thoughts and actions with an unrelenting hand. The boy learned to suppress his fears and desires, to mask his pain with quiet endurance, lest he invite further punishment or scorn. In this crucible of hardship, the boy's identity was fragmented. He was no longer simply a child, but a servant shaped by the Church's will, a vessel for its rituals and power. The roles assigned to him left little room for individuality or growth. His name, his dreams, his very essence were subsumed beneath the weight of expectation. The boy became a shadow within the cathedral's vastness, his existence defined by duty and deprivation rather than by the promise of life. Yet, beneath this forced maturity, the boy's spirit retained a fragile flicker of resistance. Though shaped by hardship, he clung to the faintest hope that somewhere beyond these walls lay a life unbound by suffering. This hope was a quiet rebellion against the harsh reality imposed upon him, a silent assertion that despite all, he remained human. In stolen moments of solitude, the boy allowed himself to remember the warmth of his family's embrace, the taste of fresh air beyond the town's confines, the laughter that once filled his days. But such moments were fleeting, easily overshadowed by the unrelenting demands of his existence. The church's authority brooked no defiance, and the boy learned that even a glimmer of hope could be dangerous. His dreams were fragile constructs, vulnerable to the harsh winds of discipline and neglect. The cathedral's grandeur was a constant reminder of the gulf between his reality and the promise of salvation, a promise that often felt like a distant, unattainable dream. The boy's forced maturity also brought with it a creeping sense of isolation. As childhood faded, so too did the possibility of companionship and joy. Friends were scarce, and bonds difficult to forge in a world where trust was a liability. The boy moved through his days largely alone, his interactions limited to brief exchanges with other servants or the distant glances of clergy. This solitude deepened the sense of loss, emphasizing the stark divide between the innocence he had lost and the harsh world he now inhabited. The church's demands left little room for vulnerability or expression. Emotions were to be hidden, needs suppressed, and pain endured in silence. The boy learned to wear a mask of calm, concealing the turmoil within. This emotional restraint was a survival mechanism, a shield against further harm in a place where weakness often invited exploitation. Yet beneath this mask, the boy's inner world was a tumult of fear, sorrow, and longing, a silent storm invisible to those around him. Despite these hardships, the boy's resilience endured. His spirit, though battered, was not broken. The forced maturity that shaped him was a harsh teacher, yet it also forged a strength born of necessity. In the face of relentless adversity, the boy cultivated an inner fortitude that sustained him through long days and darker nights. This resilience was a testament to the human capacity to endure, even when hope seems distant and the future uncertain. The loss of childhood was not merely a personal tragedy, but a reflection of a broader system that demanded sacrifice from the most vulnerable. The boy's transformation from innocent child to hardened servant was emblematic of a world where poverty and power intersected to shape destinies with little regard for compassion. The church, for all its spiritual grandeur, exacted a heavy toll on those who served within its shadow, demanding maturity before its time and silencing the cries of youth. Within the cathedral's vast and echoing chambers, the boy's story was one of many, countless children whose lives were shaped by hardship and loss, their innocence surrendered to the unyielding demands of an institution that prized order over empathy. The boy moved through this world with quiet determination, a fragile figure navigating a landscape where childhood was a luxury few could afford. And so, beneath the soaring arches and sacred relics, the boy's journey continued, a journey marked by the painful shedding of youth and the forging of a resilience that would carry him forward, even as the shadows of the cathedral closed ever tighter around him. Amidst the relentless demands and suffocating discipline that marked the boy's existence within the cathedral's towering walls, faint glimmers of resistance flickered like fragile candles against the encroaching darkness. Though the church's authority sought to mold him into an obedient servant, the boy found subtle ways to assert his humanity, to carve out moments of quiet defiance and fleeting joy amidst the harshness that threatened to consume him. In stolen moments between the endless chores, the boy sought solace in secret prayers whispered beneath his breath, words that were his alone, a private conversation with a God who seemed distant, yet offered the faintest promise of mercy. These prayers were not always learned by rote, but sometimes improvised from the heart, fragile petitions for strength, protection, or simply a measure of peace. They were acts of quiet rebellion, small affirmations of faith that transcended the church's rigid dictates and spoke directly to the boy's yearning soul. Friendships, rare and tentative, became lifelines within the cathedral's cold expanse. the boy found companionship in other servants, children whose faces bore the same marks of hardship and whose eyes held similar shadows of sorrow. In whispered exchanges and shared glances, they forged fragile bonds that defied the institution's attempts to isolate and control. These connections, though fleeting and fraught with risk, offered moments of warmth and understanding, a brief respite from loneliness and fear. The cathedral's art and music, designed to inspire awe and devotion, became unexpected sanctuaries for the boy's spirit. His eyes would linger on the intricate carvings of angels and saints, their serene expressions a stark contrast to the turmoil within. The painted frescoes and stained glass windows cast kaleidoscopes of color across the stone floors, infusing the heavy air with a sense of wonder. In these moments, the boy glimpsed a world beyond his suffering, a world of beauty, mystery, and possibility that kindled a fragile hope within his heart. The choir's ethereal melodies, rising and falling like a sacred tide, stirred something deep within the boy. Though he was not among the singers, the music spoke to his longing for freedom and grace. It was a language beyond words, a balm for the wounds inflicted by labor and neglect. The boy would pause in his duties to listen, allowing the harmonies to wash over him, momentarily lifting the weight that pressed upon his young shoulders. These acts of quiet resistance were not without danger. The church's strict order brooked no deviation, and even the smallest displays of independence could invite scrutiny or punishment. The boy learned to conceal his prayers, friendships, and moments of wonder beneath a careful mask of obedience. Yet these fragile rebellions sustained him, offering a measure of agency in a world that sought to deny his very humanity. The boy's yearning for a life beyond servitude also manifested in dreams, silent visions of fields bathed in sunlight, of laughter shared beneath open skies, and of a family reunited in warmth and love. These dreams were fragile, often shattered by the harsh realities of his daily existence, yet they persisted as a quiet rebellion against despair. In the privacy of his thoughts, the boy nurtured a hope that someday, somehow, he might escape the cathedral's shadow and reclaim the innocence stolen from him. In the face of relentless hardship, these moments of quiet resistance revealed the boy's indomitable spirit. Though battered by abuse and burdened by duty, he refused to be wholly consumed by his circumstances. His small acts of defiance, prayers whispered in secret, friendships forged in silence, and the simple act of noticing beauty amid suffering were expressions of resilience that transcended the strictures imposed upon him. The cathedral, for all its grandeur and authority, could not extinguish the flicker of hope that burned within the boy's heart. In its vastness, where power sought to dominate and suppress, the boy's spirit found ways to endure and assert itself. These moments, though fleeting and fragile, were profound testaments to the human capacity for resistance and survival in even the bleakest of environments. As the boy navigated the arduous path of servitude, these small acts of rebellion offered not only solace but a quiet assertion of identity. They were reminders that beneath the layers of duty and discipline lay a human soul yearning for freedom, connection, and meaning. In the cathedral's shadowed halls, amidst the echoes of prayers and the weight of stone, the boy's story unfolded as a delicate balance between submission and defiance, suffering and hope. These quiet sparks of resistance, though often unseen and unheard, were the threads that wove resilience into the boy's being. They sustained him through long days and darker nights, offering a fragile promise that even in a world defined by power and control, the human spirit could endure and perhaps one day prevail. The boy's fragile resilience began to falter as the relentless hardships of his life within the cathedral wore heavily upon his body and spirit. The cold stone floors he swept each day, the endless hours bent over candles and vessels, and the meagre rations he consumed could no longer sustain the fragile flame of health flickering within him. Illness crept quietly, an invisible adversary that gnawed at his strength and deepened the shadows that already clung to his small frame. The cathedral, majestic and imposing, offered no sanctuary from sickness. The boy's ailments, fevers that left him shivering beneath thin blankets, coughs that rattled his chest in the silence of the night, were met with indifference or suspicion. To the clergy and overseers, he was a mere servant, a tool to be used and discarded as needed, not a child deserving of care or compassion. His suffering was a quiet echo lost amid the chants and rituals that filled the vast nave. Medical knowledge in this time was rudimentary at best, and the boy's condition, likely a combination of malnutrition, exhaustion, and infection, deteriorated without proper treatment. The infirmary, if such a place could be called that, was a cold chamber where the sick were left to endure pain in solitude. The boy's feeble protests and whispered pleas for mercy were swallowed by stone walls that had witnessed countless such tragedies. The church's concern was reserved for the souls of the faithful, not for the bodies of those who served in shadows. As his strength waned, the boy found it increasingly difficult to perform even the simplest tasks. His limbs grew heavy, his breath shallow, and his once steady steps faltered. The weight of his duties, once a burden he carried with quiet endurance, became an unbearable yoke. Yet, even as his body betrayed him, the church's demands remained unrelenting. There was no reprieve for weakness, no sanctuary for the sick among the servants. The boy was expected to meet the same exacting standards, to serve without complaint or delay. The boy's decline did not go unnoticed, but the attention he received was cold and clinical rather than compassionate. Overseers marked him as weak, a liability to the efficient operation of the cathedral. Whispers of his failing health circulated among the clergy, not with concern but as a matter of practical consequence. His diminished capacity was a problem to be managed, not a plea to be heard. The boy's humanity was eclipsed by his role, reduced to a statistic in the church's vast apparatus. Isolation deepened as illness, confined the boy to the shadowed corners of the cathedral, away from the warmth of hearth and companionship. The few friendships he had nurtured grew distant, strained by his inability to keep pace with the demands of servitude. Loneliness pressed upon him like a physical weight, compounding the ache of his failing body. In these moments the cathedral's grandeur felt suffocating, its sacred halls transformed into a prison that held him captive in sickness and despair. Yet, even in the depths of decline, the boy's spirit clung to fragile threads of hope, memories of whispered prayers, stolen moments of beauty, and fleeting acts of kindness offered faint comfort against the encroaching darkness. His faith, though tested, remained a source of solace, a quiet companion in the long nights of fever and pain. In the silence, the boy sought refuge in the promise of mercy beyond this life, a hope that transcended the physical suffering that bound him. The Church, for all its claims of compassion and salvation, revealed its limitations in the face of the boy's suffering. Its vast power and wealth did little to alleviate the plight of those at the margins, whose lives were expendable in the grand design of faith and authority. The boy's illness was a stark reminder of the human cost hidden beneath the cathedral's splendor, a cost borne by those unseen and unheard, sacrificed to sustain the institution's magnificence. As the boy's health continued to deteriorate, the boundaries between life and death blurred. Each breath became a fragile victory against the tide of illness that threatened to consume him. His body, once resilient in the face of hardship, now trembled under the weight of exhaustion and neglect. The cathedral's cold stones bore silent witness to his decline, indifferent to the fading light within one small servant's soul. In these final stages, the boy's story was a quiet testament to the fragility of life amidst the grandeur of faith and power. His suffering, though concealed by the cathedral's vastness, echoed the experiences of countless others who bore the burdens of servitude and neglect. The Church's indifference to his plight underscored the harsh realities faced by those at the lowest rungs of medieval society, where survival was a daily struggle and mercy a scarce grace. The boy's fading strength was a somber reflection of a world where innocence was routinely sacrificed to the demands of authority and order. His body, worn thin by labor and illness, embodied the vulnerability of those caught in the intersection of poverty, power, and faith. The cathedral, a monument to spiritual aspiration, stood as both sanctuary and prison, a place where suffering was both hidden and endured in silence. As the boy lay weakened in the shadowed recesses of the cathedral, the life that had begun with hopeful innocence approached a quiet, uncertain end. His story, woven into the fabric of the Church's vast history, remained largely untold, a whispered sorrow beneath the echoes of prayer. Yet within this silence, The boy's experience spoke profoundly of the human cost embedded in the grandeur of medieval faith, a cost borne by the vulnerable, whose lives flickered briefly before fading into the annals of forgotten history. The boy's final breath slipped quietly beneath the soaring arches of the cathedral, a life extinguished far from the warmth of family or the comfort of friendship. His death was but a faint ripple in the vast, unyielding current of the medieval church's history, a single, anonymous loss amid countless others whose names were never recorded, whose stories were swallowed by time and silence. Within the grandeur of the cathedral, his passing went unnoticed by the throngs of worshippers, overshadowed by the splendor of faith and the ceaseless rituals of devotion. His body lay in a cold, unadorned corner, far from the altars and relics that drew the faithful in reverence. No mournful procession marked his departure, no tearful lament echoed through the nave. The boy, once full of fragile hope and quiet resilience, became one more forgotten soul bound to the institution that had shaped and ultimately consumed him. His absence left no void in the church's vast machinery, only a silent testament to the countless lives sacrificed in its name. The cathedral's walls, witnesses to centuries of faith and power, held no memory of the boy beyond the faint imprint of his footsteps on the stone floors, the shadows cast by flickering candles he once tended. The grandeur of the church, its soaring ceilings and sacred art, concealed the human cost embedded in its foundation, the lost childhoods, the silent sufferings, the nameless servants who sustained its magnificence. The boy's story, like so many others, remained a hidden thread woven into the fabric of history, invisible yet integral. In the broader narrative of medieval Christendom, the boy's life and death were eclipsed by tales of kings and popes, saints and sinners, battles and miracles. His existence was a quiet footnote, erased by time and overshadowed by the church's grand designs. Yet within this obscurity lay a profound truth. Behind every great institution are countless individuals whose sacrifices remain unacknowledged, whose pain is silenced beneath the weight of authority and tradition. The boy's journey, marked by hardship, loss, and fleeting moments of hope, reflects a universal story of those caught in the crosscurrents of power and poverty. His servitude was both a product and a symbol of a world where innocence was commodified, where survival demanded endurance beyond what should be asked of any child. His death, though unremarked upon, challenges us to remember the human lives hidden beneath history's grand edifices. Though the boy's life ended in anonymity, his story endures as a poignant reminder of the cost borne by the vulnerable within powerful institutions. It calls us to recognize the countless forgotten souls whose labor and suffering sustained the Church's spiritual and temporal authority. Their lives, though erased from official records, deserve acknowledgement and compassion, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit amid systemic cruelty. In the quiet aftermath of his death, the cathedral continued its ceaseless cycle of worship and ceremony, oblivious to the boy who once served within its walls. The candles burned, the choirs sang, and the faithful prayed, carried forward by rituals that masked the suffering beneath. Yet, if one listens closely within the cathedral's vast silence, there is a faint echo, a whisper of lives like the boy's, enduring beyond the stone and stained glass. This echo invites reflection on the intersection of faith, power, and humanity. It urges us to see beyond the grandeur and to acknowledge the hidden sacrifices that underpin history's great institutions. The boy's narrative, though shrouded in silence, challenges the comfortable narratives of glory and salvation, revealing instead a complex tapestry woven with pain and endurance. His story serves as a solemn meditation on the countless lives lost to servitude and neglect, a human cost too often obscured by the passage of time. It reminds us that history is not only composed of the deeds of the mighty, but also of the silent endurance of the powerless. To honor the boy is to honor all who have suffered unseen, to bear witness to their humanity and to carry their memory forward. In the end, the boy's life and death stand as a fragile testament to resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. His existence, though fleeting and uncelebrated, affirms the enduring presence of the human spirit beneath the weight of history. His story, whispered through the ages, calls upon us to remember not only the edifices of faith, but the individuals whose lives gave them meaning, however quietly, however briefly,